I'll start with a confession. I'm afraid of heights. And I've been repeating to myself this sentence like 1 billion times. Once I was in Paris for work, and having just a little time to visit the city, I ended up the Eiffel Tower. But as soon as I stepped out the elevator, I completely froze. I couldn't reach the edge, and therefore I didn't see anything. I just kept repeating to myself, I'm afraid of heights. But here I am, a few years later, climbing up a mountain wall. Still terrified, of course, but at least I could move. So what changed? Well, what changed is that I learned how to step out of my comfort zone. And I have my first startup to thank for that. Creating a startup is in many ways like climbing up the mountain wall. The floor feels far, far away. You feel exposed. But somehow you learn to trust the rope, your partners, your vision. You know, when I co-founded my first company, I just kept repeating that I hated all sorts of risks. Yet, I answered the call for adventure coming from my co-founder, and after 10 years, we reached 40 million euros turnover, and we sold the company to a multinational competitor. So yes, of course, in those 10 years, I learned how to step out of my comfort zone, but I also learned a few other lessons that I'm keeping close ever since. People first. Well, of course, every organization is made of people. Your co-workers, your co-founder, your partners, your suppliers. They will determine not only your success, but also who you become along the way, how much you enjoy your journey with them. So choose the ones who will challenge you when you're wrong, the ones that will celebrate with you when you're right, but especially choose the ones who will stay when things get harder, because they always do. Also, I learned the hard way that communication is the most important thing in the world, in all directions. And clarity is never enough, especially when it comes to customers. You know, once we asked a customer of ours to send us her social security number, for fiscal reasons. And yes, we got it a few days later, right in the office, because she physically mailed the thing to us. Clarity is never enough. And I think this was one of the most important lessons for me when I later on started working in education. Having to communicate and connect with such a diverse group of people made of students, their families, teachers, institutions, and so many more. Also, start small, validate fast, but stay flexible. We made so many mistakes by developing products with too little testing. And today, with digital technologies, it's much faster and easier to prototype, validate, and pivot. But you still need to be able to listen to the feedbacks that you are getting. So we also experimented with a lot of new products because somehow we felt that we were missing out on a lot of things that were happening around us. But I learned that sometimes it's important to focus, to make that one thing work before going out chasing new opportunities. And this doesn't mean that sometimes you need to just stop, look around, and see how the context has been changing. After all, you've been walking down your path, and as it always happens, new horizons may have emerged in front of your eyes. And maybe if you take the time to explore them a little bit, you will find out that you want to change your route because you just didn't know that those things ever existed before seeing them in these new horizons. So you need to be flexible. So after selling my first company, I had all these lessons with me and I felt I was ready for another challenge. So I right away co-founded a non-profit organization working in education. I wanted to empower younger generations with the skills to navigate the future through digital technologies, STEM education, and futures literacy. And I thought I had an answer. I was in my 30s by then, so I'd spent 2/3 of my life in a classroom and 1/3 creating a successful innovative startup. So I thought, well, I knew everything about how school works and that I knew how to innovate almost anything. And later on, I also found out that I wasn't the only one thinking this way about education. Because education is one of those things, right? We all care deeply about it. We all have at least one direct experience, and some of us tend to think that it needs fixing, that we know how to do it better than anyone else, and that technology will somehow do the trick, just as the narratives around technology and education have been telling us for years now. Well, of course, I couldn't be more wrong. I knew nothing. Because schools are not machines to be optimized. They are living organisms. They are complex, dynamic, and deeply human. So I started from scratch. And after a few years traveling all around Italy and working almost every day side by side with teachers and learners, well, then I thought I was starting to understand how school worked. And then COVID-19 happened. And I was suddenly invited to join a task force created by the Minister of Education in order to rethink school after the emergency. And working with such a group of experts, I realized that when it comes to school, there's always something new to learn. And that as it is such a complex ecosystem, well, if you want to create meaningful change, the only way is to have private and public sector and civil society come together. And after that, my organization raised some funds and transformed into an EdTech company providing schools with teachers training, digital tools, and content. And even then, as a for-profit company now, well, I understood that the Italian K-12 education is not a market. It's a community. Competition doesn't work the same way. It's all based on partnerships, trust, and a shared purpose. I also realized how much technology without pedagogy and teaching practice just doesn't work. We've been so lucky in Italy. We got so many funds coming in for schools in the last few years, and there were a lot of funds to buy technological equipment. But those funds were completely separated from the funds related to teachers training and innovation. So there wasn't a systemic approach. meaning that at the end a lot of schools struggled and are still struggling integrating those tools in their day-by-day activity. Also sometimes we get obsessed by cutting-edge technologies and we think we need them in order to innovate. Because sometimes we think that technology equals innovation, but we couldn't be more wrong. And so, you don't learn to drive in a Ferrari, right? Likewise, we don't need the most powerful AI in the world to transform education. We just need the right one. One that is not an adaptation of what we use in the workplace. One that is age-appropriate, culturally fit, ethical, inclusive. And as EdTech entrepreneurs, I think that our work doesn't stop just by, selling a product or a service. It's a process, sitting there with teachers and learners, trying to understand if the tools that we are creating are able to create real value for them. Meaning also making sure that these are tools that foster collaboration, agency, and metacognition. So now, after a very recent second exit, I find myself in the position to enjoy new horizons. Some of them look very scary. Some of them look marvelous. Mostly, they look like they can be both things. Especially when I think about AI and its impacts on our society. AI, it's already everywhere. It is already impacting informal, non-formal, and formal education. I also would argue that now all our culture and knowledge is mediated by AI. Think about it. How many times do we say things like, oh, well, I found it on Google, or I heard it on TikTok or Instagram or whatever? Meaning that somehow we are also trying to validate that the knowledge that we are sharing and co-creating is true by saying that we found it through AI. And I call this new paradigm AI Dixit, meaning AI itself said it, therefore it must be true. And what do we do when we find ourselves immersed in a new paradigm? Well, of course, we need new strategies. Well, first of all, we need to be sure that whatever we experiment with in the classroom is completely safe. But we also need to make sure that we are safe the moment we step out the classroom. Because we will need the skills and the critical thinking in order to cope with the challenges that we may encounter. And to do that, I think that we need to deeply know what AI is, and to do that we need to experiment safely, of course, firsthand with it. Professor Weizenbaum, the creator of the very first chatbot, Eliza, once wrote that general purpose technologies, such as AI, are usually slower in their development, and that true innovation doesn't come from their original design, but from the ways that people use them in disruptive and transformative ways. Well, think about the early days of the web. It was primarily designed as a tool to share files among researchers. And nobody expected that one of its most disruptive innovations would be something as simple as sending each other emails. And yet, that unplanned innovation and application changed everything. completely transforming the way that we communicate, work, and live. And today we stand at a similar threshold with digital technologies and especially with AI. We cannot foresee all the ways that it will evolve and transform education and our culture. But we get to be the ones who experiment and innovate with it. We get to be the ones who decide why we use it and who we become by using it. And we need these new narratives that we can create by experimenting with it to come from classrooms, not from boardrooms. So here I am. I set to explore these new horizons in front of me. And I really hope that some of you will join me in this exploration. So let's do it. Let's explore, imagine, and build the most meaningful possible future for education.